with the Everyday Buddhism crew. I'm going to introduce our group here today. I'll start with me. Everybody, I think, knows who I am. I'm Wendy Shinyo Sensei, the host of Everyday Buddhism, Making Every Day Better podcast. And we're talking about what Everyday Buddhism is all about. And I'm joined by two of my friends, the Dharma brothers, Sangha brothers, and practice leaders for our Everyday Buddhism Sangha. And I will introduce them. I'll introduce Terry Hosken first. Terry?
Hi. And about myself?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I'm Terry, and I've been sort of a member of the Everyday Sangha for a number of years now. I first joined up when there was a discussion of the Heart Sutra going on. And this is a subject that had been near and dear to my heart since I first became interested in Buddhism decades ago. But other than that, I don't really have any background with the particular styles of Buddhism that Wendy and Bradley are with. So I feel like I'm a little bit of an odd duck out. I'm a retired software engineer. My education was in physics, and so I come to this from a sort of maybe slightly more secular point of view than Wendy does. But there's room for everyone in the big tent.
And don't forget, you are a longtime Zen practitioner, right?
Yeah, so I don't forget that, and I don't know how much you want me to spend talking about myself at this stage. But yeah, I started practicing Zen shortly after getting out of college. I was interested in Buddhism and Zen and read a lot of books during high school and college. During sort of the exploratory phase of what do I believe and what should I believe and what's right and wrong and good and evil all about and all of these kinds of questions. And do you turn to science? Do you turn to religion? Which religion? All of these kinds of questions that young people struggle with. And not only young people, but everyone does. And Buddhism attracted me, and Zen in particular seemed very interesting. I can go into more detail about how I first became exposed to these ideas if it comes up. But again, I don't want to waste too much time on myself right now. But shortly after college, a friend of mine who you also know through interesting coincidences in life. Who was a college friend of mine, and I went to a local Zen temple in Chicago just to check it out, and not knowing what to expect when we got there. It happened to be a Soto Zen tradition, and we got to sit facing a wall, meditate, and do the things that we'd only read about in books up until this point, and find out what that was like. And I was pretty well hooked. I didn't spend a lot of time going to that temple because life was in the way and whatnot, but I did pick up some CDs and recordings of teachings by the head priest there, and got to listen to all of those in addition to all of the book reading and so forth. And there was a one of the tracks on one of the CDs was a recording of them doing the Heart Sutra chants, which is why that one stuck with me for so long. And even though over the intervening years I was not actively engaged with a Sangha, I would still occasionally listen to the teachings. I would definitely frequently do the chanting. I eventually memorized the English version of the Heart Sutra, and I would chant it to myself in the car on the way to and from work. Not every day. I mean, I wasn't over the top on this kind of stuff. But often enough, especially when in periods of my life, it seemed like I needed to get a little bit more grounded and centered in things. This was just a way of bringing, that kind of practice into my life. So again, the same guy who went to the Zen temple with me shortly after college became a Bright Dawn lay minister as well in that program. And he was aware of your upcoming Heart Sutra study and said, hey, you might be interested in this. And I was. And so that was my introduction to this particular group. And, I can go into more reasons about why I stayed, but again, how much time do we have to talk about me?
Endless, but we can, but we can talk about that later, because there is a place that I do want to talk about, like what we took from being members of the Everyday
Yeah.
Sangha, how it's helped us and so forth.
Yeah.
That time we can do that.
Oh,
But thank you.
I probably, it would be important to mention that that's not the extent of my Soto Zen involvement. After retiring from my professional career as a full-time software developer, I sought out a local Zen temple and found one here in the Seattle area, which is where I live. And I've been actively engaged with that group, which meets in person, except during the pandemic. But it's back to, some in-person meetings now. And so I do, sit on a regular basis with two different, Soto Zen groups, one which is headquartered here and another one which is affiliated, but located in Rochester, New York, which I attend via Zoom on a weekly basis when they're having sessions, which is, since they're affiliated with the RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology, the teacher there is a professor of philosophy. And so his online Zoom sessions are during school session, so they're not, throughout the whole year.
Great. Thank you, Terry. That's awesome. And I think everybody gets a flavor. I'm trying to introduce people to the Sangha so they see we're just regular people.
Yeah,
doing regular things. And
I'm a regular guy.
And we're all different, and the ages are all different. And to highlight that, next we'll introduce Bradley Nussbaum. Bradley Jinaiyo. He is a recent graduate of the Bright Dawn Lay Ministry program. So he is a sensei with Bright Dawn. So Bradley, take it away. Let us know all about you briefly.
Gotcha. Thank you, Wendy. Yes, that's right. That's who I am. And I did indeed complete the Bright Dawn Lay Ministry program last year. A little bit about me. I too been a member of the Everyday Buddhism Sangha for quite some time. I believe since its beginnings.
I think so.
I think in the spring of 19, and very happy to be doing this and offering this to the public. That way folks can kind of see some of our other faces, our friendly faces, and, maybe demystify a little bit about what our meetings are like and what our conversations are like. So this is wonderful. So thank you both for being part of this, and, for Wendy for leading the way, and so much appreciated there. So I, during the day, I'm a social worker, specifically hospice social worker. More recently, I've been a social worker for about 8 years now. And so that ties in a lot with, what I've learned from and what I've gained from Buddhist practice and being a member of the Everyday Sangha community. More to come on that later. I can get into that down the line. But yeah, I think that's kind of what I do. I live out here in the great garden state of New Jersey, the blueberry capital of the world, Hamilton, New Jersey. And we have a few cats here, 2.5, we like to say. One's a hybrid, indoor, outdoor. And we'll see if we get any unexpected visitors from them today. They've been known to jump up on the table and join in on our calls from time to time. So, yeah, I think everyday Buddhism has meant a great deal to me. It's hard to put to words. So I'm looking forward to just kind of getting into more of a conversation about, what that's meant for all of us, individually, and where we might share some meaning in it as well.
Thank you, Bradley. I'm just going to add something. I hope it doesn't embarrass you. He's also a mad, crazy drummer.
Yep.
With a what would you classify your music? Is it punk? What is it?
I guess, well, we don't want to be too strict or attached to labels, right?
There
But
you go.
you could say punk, hardcore, metal, grindcore, whatever you want.
Okay.
It's
Well,
up to the
see,
listener.
It's
I'm
not cool
trying.
jazz, though.
No.
No, I'm trying to show the diversity of our group, and diversity in ages, diversity in we go from Terry, who's a logical physicist, much like my brother, so I'm very used to that. And and Bradley, who's this generally soft-spoken social worker who likes to talk about death, but also this wild drummer. So it's so fun, and it's also indicative, as Bradley pointed out, that don't label anything, because once you do, you put a period on it, and then somebody can't be anything else. But we're a lot of things. So thank you, Bradley. Thank you, Terry, for your introductions. Why I'm doing this, number one, is I've had some feedback, like people wanted to join the Sangha, but they were afraid, which kind of was a mind-blowing concept to me, because I was like, I could get being afraid to walking in a temple and not knowing temple etiquette. I could, that kind of stuff. But being afraid to join a Zoom call, which is like what everybody does for everything since the pandemic, it just seems strange to me. So I wanted to demystify and make it more palatable and inviting, and that it's an experience that's not the least bit intimidating. And yes, it's serious in that we talk about serious subjects and we ponder them, and we try to practice them, but we also goof around, and laugh, and that's cool too. So that's one of the reasons why. But I also wanted to talk about my concept of everyday Buddhism. I started a podcast when I was 65 years old. So there's the change, there's the age diversity. And I was asked by people who listen to the podcast, how can I join a Sangha? How can I join a Sangha? How can I join a Sangha? So I thought, okay, I'll start a virtual Sangha. And this was before starting a virtual Sangha was the thing you had to do during the pandemic, when everybody scrambled who had temples on how to do it. I already had one, and Bradley was one of my first Sangha members. And so I wanted to talk about the thought I have behind Everyday Buddhism, because I think it's really important for me anyway. It may not be important to anybody else, but I think it's very important to distinguish everyday Buddhism from a lot of different ways people think about Buddhism. It's not highly religious, and it's also not completely secular. And that's really a hard thing to put into words. And so the more we talk about this in our little chats here, I think the better it will be, and you'll see what we're talking about. So I'm trying to talk about it as a type of Buddhism. It came from, as some people know, the lineage of the Bright Dawn Center of Oneness Buddhism, where Bradley and I both became lay ministers and senseis. And the Bright Dawn lineage is a non-sectarian Japanese Mahayana lineage that is kind of a conglomerate due to the studies and practices of Reverend Gyomei Kabose and Reverend Koyo Kabose. Reverend Koyo Kabose was our direct teacher, Bradley and my direct teacher, before he passed last year. His father, Reverend Gyomei, was the founder of the Chicago Temple in Buddhism, Chicago Buddhist Temple, which was an offshoot of sort of the Shin Buddhist, but it wasn't really strictly Shin, which shows you how Bright Dawn and how everyday Buddhism came to be kind of not this, not this, not this, not this, but this maybe, you know what I mean? So I'm trying to get that across. But it is strongly influenced by both Shin Buddhism and Zen Buddhism, which is a good combination in my mind. But it also came, the everyday Buddhism concept came from, I can't help but be influenced by, I have decades of study and practice in Tibetan Buddhism, but I can't help but be influenced by that. It's not a negative. I kind of left the practice, but I didn't leave its imprint on me. But the thing I really want to talk about today is, I think more than anything, everyday Buddhism is a way of life. Okay. It's focused more importantly on the way of life point. Reverend Gyomay used to say, Buddhism is dead if you only read books. It only becomes alive if someone tries it on, tries it out, and starts living it. Buddhism means nothing if you're not using it in your life. It's just another thing to read about and add to your already too full mind. Okay. And Reverend Gyomay Kabose, the father of our Bradley and my direct teacher, wrote a book called Everyday Suchness. Now, suchness is a term used to imply the emptiness concept of Buddhism, which actually means not this, not this, not this, kind of. So it really works for us. Now I'm taking a lot of liberties here, but philosophically, but I see Terry laughing, but that was the thrust of the lineage, is kind of everyday book. And so I wanted to read one thing from his book, The Center Within, because I think this is really a good way to get our discussion started today. In his book, The Center Within, Reverend Gyomay Kabose quotes the famous Zen teacher Nansen. He was the one that did the koan about the dead cat, but you can look that up. Who was asked, the teacher was asked by his disciple, what is Buddhism? His answer was everyday life. And then Reverend Gyomay went on to say that we talk about the way in Buddhism, or the path. It's kind of like the Tao, okay? Only in this case, it's the way, or the path. And Reverend Gyomay writes, what is the path? What kind? And he asks the question. He sort of like lays down the gauntlet for you to answer it for yourself. What kind of path do you walk? We make many pretensions and we represent things as we want them to be. We do not see things as they are. We do not understand life as it is. Buddhism is the most natural way of life, where every little thing we do is the way. Every way is different, yet there is a great way in Buddhism that everyone walks. It is the same path, but different to each individual. The universal and the particular become one. You live your own life. You live, I live. Life is art when lived that way. Art must be original and unique. Like the art of haiku, which is Japanese poetry, is the Buddhist life expressed in poetic form. Each moment in life is a poem in itself. It is the way that Nansen pointed to when he said, Buddhism is everyday life. So I thought that's a good way to get the discussion started. We can go anywhere with that. And what I like in our Sangha, and trust me, we go everywhere. And we go everywhere based on what that means to someone's particular life at that particular moment in time. Reverend Coyle used to teach, life is just person, place, and time. Person, place, and time. So we talk about everything from psychotherapy to our rotten job, a dead coffee maker, to everything. So I'm going to let you guys go with this for a while before I say anything. Who wants to start? And this is how we do it in the Sangha. Who wants to start?
I've got something.
Yay!
Got it. One thing that came to mind, and thank you for sharing about the Bright Dawn lineage and you know, how that ties into, you know, what is the conversation, right? Topic around what is everyday Buddhism, right? How is it maybe different from other forms? And you mentioned wanting to do this partly to give people kind of a glimpse of what our conversations are like, and we can kind of, as you mentioned, just reading maybe about Buddhism maybe isn't enough, and there needs to be that experiential piece of trying the teachings on, trying them out for oneself, including to be part of a community, or multiple sometimes. And so I wanted to just acknowledge, maybe there's a question in here, but just acknowledge, and I've shared this before, outside of this recording, about vulnerability. Because you mentioned, maybe I'm challenging you a little bit, Wendy. You mentioned, why would people be intimidated? You know, what's there to be afraid of in coming to the Sangha? And I think one would be the question marks of the unknown. What'll it be like, right? Getting into different, even though it's virtual, it's still a new social environment, so to say, a group. There can always be that fear of rejection. And that brings me to the vulnerability it requires, which will be a different amount. Context, right, matters for each person depending on where they are in life. I think what I like to kind of point the conversation to is everyday Buddhism is a way of life in which we're living a full, meaningful life with our hearts open to the realities of our lives and everything going on in the world. So it's an approach that, in my mind, has us practice opening ourselves to the world. That requires some willingness and vulnerability to feel things we may not have felt in a long time. And I think that also applies to communicating, interacting with others in the Sangha, because we're bringing ourselves and our hurts and our stories and our histories. And, you know, for myself, my jumping off point to search for some type of spirituality or religion was something that was tremendously painful. It was, my father had been sick with Alzheimer's disease for a number of years. And I got to a point when nothing was really quite doing it, right? Helping me kind of cope with the tremendous amount of change going on in my life and my father's life and our lives as a family. And there's the ripple effects, right? So for me, I got to a point where I thought, you know, I think maybe it's spirituality, right? Maybe it might be beyond recreational activities, social friendships, therapy. And long story short, that's what got me to looking into podcasts. I found myself drawn to the Buddhist authors and whatnot. And it didn't take long for me to find Everyday Buddhism and find that I really resonated with Wendy's teaching and message, and just, you know, her vibe all around. So I was at a point when I was pretty much desperate for support, you know. There was a strong desire for connection. And that was what I shared at one of our first Sangha meetings, when we talked about, what's your why? What is your intention for learning about Buddhism and practicing and coming to Sangha? And it's just connection. I didn't really know what that would mean or what I would learn down the line, But I think a lot of it boils down to that, and it could be scary, and at the same time can be deeply meaningful, and it has been for me. So that's what I wanted to just kind of throw out there and share.
That's
Very well
excellent. And,
said.
I kind of remember, Bradley, before Terry, you jump in, I kind of remember that conversation, that when you said connection, and it touched me deeply because um it was one of my reasons, because I was getting these emails that people wanted that connection, even if they didn't know the meaning of Sangha or anything like that. It's like, you know, we all want connection in some ways, and we seek it in different ways, like neighbors, friends, families, coworkers, stuff. But it is different, and you're right. You said you're going to push back on me about why would someone be scared of coming to the Zoom Sangha. You were absolutely right. I did overlook that, because this is a totally it's a social, it's a gathering, or it's a place where we would share ourselves with other people, that is totally outside the realms of the way we normally share ourselves. So it's totally an area of uncertainty. So thank you for sharing all that, Bradley. See how we share? Okay, Terry.
Yeah, I had a couple of different thoughts, maybe two or three. One was on that same subject of why would anybody be, intimidated or afraid of joining. And a part of why I'm here too is because it is so unintimidating once you get here, right? The idea of going to a Japanese Soto Zen temple. I mean, when I first went, I was afraid everybody's going to be Japanese, everybody's going to be speaking Japanese. I'm not going to know what's going on. I don't know the rituals. I don't know. I'm going to make a complete fool of myself, and those were all the fears going through my head. I could only do it because I had a friend going with me, and so we had the sort of mutual support, and it turned out not to be intimidating at all. And yet that is so much more than joining a Zoom call. And so there's I think Bradley is or whoever mentioned, there's spot on, the idea of the possibility of rejection. Maybe it was you, Wendy, who mentioned that. I don't remember. But those are totally valid feelings to be having. And again, this is why we're doing this, is to try and just exemplify, we're ordinary people, not somebody to be afraid of. And so we can very welcoming to anybody who ever shows up. That was one thought. Another one was, oh gosh, I had two that Bradley brought up in my mind, and I can only remember one right now, so I'll start with that, and maybe I'll remember the second one, and maybe I won't. Then that goes back to origin stories, and the sort of the a lot of people turn to one religion or another because of something traumatic, right, in their life. And my origin story I alluded to was way back. I'm 60 years old now, and this was something taking place in my early preteens, I think. But I am the product of divorced parents who moved around the country a lot. I went to a different school almost every year, in different states, ranging from Pennsylvania to New Mexico to Hawaii to Illinois. And so I was constantly going from place to place. I was always the outsider. I was always kind of a foreigner. And when I saw the TV show Kung Fu from 1970s, starring David Carradine, who's this Buddhist monk. I mean, people today might not know anything about the show, but I'm sure you do, Wendy.
Yes,
who was also, he was in the United States. He was an outsider. He was a foreigner. He was going from town to town. Every place he went, he was, the new guy in town. And he exemplified this philosophy of peaceful living and coexistence and cooperation and all these positive virtues. But people were always hostile toward him because he was different and an outsider, and people are suspicious of things that are different and outside their normal experience. And so I just identified with that character so much. And he also had the strength, though, to stand up for the weak and the victims in the world. And he didn't allow himself to be a victim because he had the training in Shaolin Kung Fu to stand up for himself. and this was eye-opening to me on one level. It was, inspiring on another. And so it's just like I wanted to have what that character had, right? I wanted to learn what he knew that allowed him to survive in this world of constant change and constant moving from place to place. And so I started learning about, what I perceived as a young person, that philosophy was. And so where I started turning to, Buddhist thought and Taoist thought and other kinds of. I also surveyed, Western religions because I wanted to be, fair and balanced and not unduly biased by one TV show. But I gravitated toward, the ideals of Buddhism, of wanting to help end suffering for all beings, starting with yourself, right? And so that was, what pulled me in initially. And I think, that was the second thought. So why everyday Buddhism? What does that mean to me? I'll bring it full circle. So as intimidating as going to something that's more, ancient, traditional, Japanese Zen or something like that, this is a breath of fresh air. This is an opportunity to sort of reinvent, the core fundamental understandings and teachings of Buddhism, but in a modern American context, and to make it accessible to more people. Because I truly believe that there's a lot of value in these teachings and these ways of thinking, which are not, ancient in their nature, right? Their nature is universal across time and space. I mean, it's about the human condition. It's about the knowing yourself, knowing your mind, understanding how you fit in with the world, and the more we understand those things, the easier our life becomes, the easier it becomes to make good decisions, to understand other people and their motivations. So, when I found Everyday Buddhism, I thought, well, this is, a good approach. This is an approach to reach people who aren't going to be reached by, going to a temple and sitting with their face against a wall and chanting and bowing and doing all of these, things that goes on in the ancient traditional traditions. Not that there's anything wrong with that, and I still participate in those too. And so, I, like Bradley said, was just, really inspired by the example that Wendy is setting and the effort that she's making with this program.
Thank you, Terry, and thank you both. You both hit on key things and actually touched my heart, because you hit on things that I was trying to say and I didn't actually put into words quite as well as the two of you did. And I just thought, I've told my origin story a lot, but if somebody just happens upon this and they haven't heard a lot about my podcast, I'll just pop that in there real quick and I won't spend a lot of time. I also got interested in Buddhism in my preteens, primarily, and it wasn't because of Kung Fu, although I do have that strong recollection that I was resonant with it. But
Your teens came a little earlier than mine, so yeah, it wouldn't have been because.
Yeah, yes, because I was a little older and I probably said, "Oh, geez, this is for young boys."
Yeah, well, I was at the time, yeah.
But yeah, but anyway, I had a profound fear of death, was preoccupied with this is a very strange thing, because I remember sitting in the bathtub when I was probably about 8 or 9 years old and having the recollection that I was thinking. I mean, that I actually had the aha moment that something was happening in my head. That's an odd thing, very hard to express, but what it did was it cemented me in a concept of self, sort of like Descartes or something. It's I think therefore I am. It was like I was very attached to that process. And then when I realized that death meant that didn't happen, then I freaked the heck out, about that. I think a lot of it had to do with my grandfather, who I was close to, my grandparents. My grandfather died on my 11th birthday, very kind of an awkward age to face that. And we were kind of hushed away, as they did back then, from having any direct experience with death, except that only, the kind of person I was even then, that only made me more, well, wait a second, I got to figure this out, It was like, how dare you hush me away? I'm gonna, what the heck? He died. What does that mean? What does that mean? And so I had a profound fear of death. Fast forward, I got over that, although I was always kind of an anxiety prone kid, an anxiety prone teenager, and an anxiety prone young adult. But what happened was, then my mother passed away suddenly. I was studying Buddhism by myself, but my mother passed away suddenly. She had electrical disturbance or a sudden death heart attack kind of thing, and so it was unexpected, and she was gone. And it was in 1997, and that was the accelerator, the Buddhist accelerator, much like Bradley's accelerator with his father and Alzheimer's. Because it was so sudden, and we had a somewhat strained relationship, where there was a lot of history that had problems in my life, that made it harder. And I've heard this before, that if you're not really, sometimes when you're not really close, it's harder because you have to keep reconciling all that stuff. So I really, even though I had been studying Buddhism, I put the pedal to the metal. I thought, this is it. I got to do it. And I never looked back. Thank goodness I had that to go to. So I just thought I think I've shared that probably in my podcasts and things. I don't know. I talk so much, I never remember what I say. But anyway, I just wanted to come full circle on that. Did you guys have anything to add? If not, I'm going to go to the next subject I'd like us to talk about. Oh, okay.
I'm fine.
Okay. So we talk about the Sangha, okay? And what is Everyday Sangha about? It's similar to any Sangha, although like Terry talked about, like the formal ritualistic, kind of sanghas that you're used to when you go to like a Soto Zen temple, or if you go to a sangha in a Tibetan temple, and they're chanting in Tibet, and conch shells are blowing and drums are beating. It's like, what the heck? But Sangha in its nature, and what I try to do, and what we try to do in this Sangha, is to make it more approachable, like Bradley said, in the sense of who we are today, without too many ritualistic elements. Yet I'm not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I'm very strong about that. I'm not going to throw out some ritualistic elements, which we'll talk about a little bit later, about what we do in our Sangha. But let's first talk about why Sangha. There was the story of why Sangha from the Pali Canon, the first teachings of the sutras of the Buddha. The story goes that one day, one of Buddha's disciples, Ananda, who was very close to the Buddha, says, I'll get the quote, "It seems to me that half of the spiritual life is good friendship, good companionship, good comradeship." And so Ananda said this to the Buddha, and then the Buddha actually corrected him, and said, even though it was a nice thing that he said, "Not so, Ananda, not so. This is the entire spiritual life, Ananda. That is good friendship, good companionship, good comradeship." And then they say, when a monk has a good friend, a good companion, a good comrade, it is to be expected that he will develop and cultivate the noble eightfold path. So in Sanskrit, there's this term called Kalyana Mitra, and that essentially just means spiritual friend. Kalyana is translated as good, true, virtuous, upright, and Mitra is the root word for Maitri, which means kindness. And a Kalyana Mitra is someone who helps you realize your deepest aspirations and keeps you on the path, keeps you inspired, keeps you motivated, and keeps you from being a jerk, right? I don't know about you guys, but I have a good friend that when I know that I've been a jerk or I think I'm being a jerk, I will text her and I'll say, "You have a minute to talk? Because I think I'm being a jerk here." Or I'll text her and I'll say, um can you talk a minute? You got to talk me out of my crazies, okay? or so that's what. And despite the fact that those of us in this Sangha, in the Everyday Sangha, never knew each other from Adam and probably would have never run into each other in any other circumstance, we are that to each other. I feel that's what the Everyday Sangha is about. And that's what I feel we are to each other. I can't tell you, well, it's just my nature, but I can't tell you how many times I cry in Sangha because I just feel so close to everybody. So it's because we all motivate each other to walk the path that Reverend Gilmay was talking about in our everyday lives. So I thought this is a good time to ask, what do we do in Everyday Sangha? What does it look like? So Terry, do you want to lead and explain what it is, how our Sangha meetings look?
So what happens in a meeting, right?
What happens in a meeting part? Yes.
Yeah.
You can talk about the historical change, or you can talk about just now or whatever.
Yeah. So, I mean, it hasn't always been this way. In fact, it's only relatively recently that we adopted this precise format, which is just putting a little bit more structure and a few more elements to what we were doing, previously. So if anybody ever, did pop in before, things are different now, but not hugely different. So we try to put a program around and some structure around our meeting to introduce a little bit more ritual, I think, and liturgical sort of format, which is important in my view, to help kind of frame, what you're about to do and to set the mind in the right mindset, sort of reset a little bit on whatever other distractions you have during the day. So we start out, we typically wait about 5 minutes for people to join. I shouldn't mention that because then people wait 5 more minutes. Anyway, but we open up the doors actually ahead of the scheduled start time so that we can have a virtual coffee hour. And if people do show up early, then it's just, coffee hour. We can discuss whatever is on your mind. We can, you can ask questions about anything before we actually get started into the program per se, or the ceremony. What's the right word to use? I'm blanking right now. But then there's once we get started, there's an opportunity for announcements. If there's something that'll be different next week, or some change in somebody's life or something like that, we can bring those up. And then we start ringing a bell to get into the formal start. There's the leader of the week, and Bradley and I are currently taking turns leading. We meet every other week, so once a month each of us gets a chance to be the leader. We'll recite some words to call us into our service. We take refuge in the three treasures. We have an intro to a chant, and then we all chant together virtually, so everybody should be on mute because it's just chaos if everybody's not on mute. But the leader will play a musical chant that the participants can then all chant along with in their respective locations. The leader then introduces a 5-minute meditation period, where again we kind of center our thoughts around something or nothing. Depending upon the particular session, there might be a suggestion from the leader about what would be a good thing to meditate on. One's also free to meditate in whatever style one prefers. We then turn toward Dharma discussion. And this comes in two forms for our group. We ask for volunteers from the Sangha. There's no obligation to do this, but we ask if a volunteer wants to provide what we call a Dharma glimpse, which is a short or theoretically short. Sometimes our glimpses are longer than our talks, but a glimpse into something that was meaningful to them. Maybe it was inspired by the reading that we're doing, and I'll come to that in just a moment, or maybe it was just some reflection on, everyday Buddhism and something that they were inspired by during the past couple of weeks. And then we get into a Dharma talk by the leader, and the Dharma talk is in principle a little bit longer than a glimpse, and is typically inspired by the reading in one way or another, but needn't be. And that lasts, each of these, the glimpse might last about 5 minutes, the talk might last about 10 minutes, give or take. Some are longer, some are shorter. And then we open it up for discussion. And the discussion will be about the talks that we've had. It'll be about the reading that we've been doing. And I keep mentioning reading, so I should mention that going along with all of this, there's typically a book that we're studying, and it will take us, depending upon the length of the book, anywhere from a couple of months to half a year or more, I think, to get through the book, because we'll tackle a chapter or two at a time, the discussions and talks will often be inspired by whatever it is that we were reading about during the last period. And the discussions, it's open floor discussion. People can raise their hand and say, I want to chime in. But there's no obligation. Nobody has to say anything. If you just want to listen and hear what other people have to say for a while before you get your feet wet, no pressure. Then after we're done with all of that, we'll do some vows, and the leader will read a dedication of merit, and we take some more vows, and then we're done. I don't think I've left anything out because I was looking at our program, but maybe I skipped a line. And yeah, so it's a mix of a little bit of formal elements, but it's done in a pretty informal way. I mean, and we're still, to be honest, kind of learning what works and what doesn't. We might change the format just a little bit. Bradley and I have different styles of chanting and different bells that we ring, but the idea is to foster the mindset, like I said, and to get people kind of receptive to thinking about what they've been reading, to thinking about what we're saying, and to listening to each other, and to learning from each other as well. It's a truism that you learn more by teaching, and so I'm learning a lot by doing this, and often learn very deep lessons from the members of the Sangha, and reminders of things that I might forget.
That's excellent. And thank you. I picked the right person to do a summary. Not that you wouldn't have done a summary like that, Bradley, but that was pretty perfect. Right on. I don't think I could have done it. And if I did read the program, I would have probably just read it. You did it right. So the next question I wanted to get to, and I was going to point to Bradley on this, but he sort of already did it earlier, about how has the Sangha helped you? You kind of went there, but maybe more specifically about, the actual, how the interaction with each other on the Sangha and that sort of thing. I don't know if you can say any more about that, Bradley.
How much time do we have?
I guess we could go forever, but yeah.
I can't fit in every way it's helped me, because there's just too much, and I want this to be consumable for people, and not see a 5-hour long podcast and say, oh, I don't want to listen to that, it's too long.
Right.
So one thing that popped up as you were going through our meeting service, Terry, was I think one thing a lot of newcomers to Buddhism, they think about enlightenment, they'll think about transcending permanently all of their human um, qualities and struggles if they could just meditate enough or chant enough or do enough prostrations, whatever it is. And, the everyday Buddhism approach um, honors, acknowledges, and accepts all of our humanness, and that our inability to see things as they are at times, our foolishness, right? So I say, at a very minimum, over the years I've been coming to the Sangha, even when there have been times where I may have felt more kind of withdrawn, but I still wanted to show up to listen, whatever the case may be, showing up and the possibility of being seen or sharing something or having someone ask me something, I think was at least an every other week reminder of my foolishness. Because we can get in our own heads of, I'm doing things right. Why is someone at work giving me such a hard time? And I don't know why my wife is, bothered by whatever, some silly everyday example when I'm not doing anything wrong. And that the community and the spiritual friendships, knowing that the Sangha members, our friends, are on the path too. We remember that we are all human beings, and it's not about spiritually bypassing our human nature. It's more so about learning ways to be, the ways of living, the everyday Buddhism way, to practice awareness, recognition of our foolishness, and just as I said, just the mere attendance of the Sangha can remind me, like, let's see all the nonsense I've been clinging onto in my head that may not be the most open way of seeing the world and interacting, relating with the world. So that's kind of on the bare minimum, which is pretty significant for me at least. On the other hand, on a bigger scale, as I shared earlier, the reason why I was seeking spiritual life, I realized it was lacking, absent, and however many years ago that was now, when my father was sick and I was going through a lot of change and a mental, emotional, spiritual struggle, I was seeking out the spirituality. And as I said, I was looking for the connection. And in our meetings, doesn't always come up, but every so often someone does share, as I did many times, about challenges they're going through. And that's not in a way to just kind of dump their emotional trauma or problems onto others. There's a real way to bring everything about your life, including the all the difficulties, and apply the teachings that we're learning through our various studies, and just the teachings by way of relating with one another. I remember it's not uncommon that when we have family members, loved ones going through excuse me, chronic or terminal illness, the caregivers or just people involved to some degree, well, they often doubt themselves in a way that's not bringing up curiosity or exploration. The doubt is more oppressive. Am I doing something wrong? What's the right way? I when there's no right way. It's usually up to each family on medical decisions and things like that. And I remember on a number of occasions, a number of different people who are still with the Sangha, some people who have come and then they stopped attending, having very brief interactions with them where I don't think the content of what they said matters as much, but it was just this allowing for me to share this, whatever the burden was, that vulnerability. And essentially what was fostered was a relationship of acceptance for the struggle I was having. So having that where I was in life, be accepted by others and that be related back to me, kind of like a mirror, allowed me to open to that possibility of a dynamic acceptance for myself. So that's kind of been one of the most, meaningful, what have I taken away from this? And that's just for me. You don't necessarily have to have some huge life change or experience like what I'm describing, illness and death, in order to start a spiritual journey. But for some people that's it, and yeah, so those are a few things that came to mind for me.
That I'm glad you brought some of that up, because it's not always big stuff that people share. It's like the little stuff like you mentioned about like your wife and your coworker and stuff. There's a lot of, at least me, I in it, when I was practicing and studying in Tibetan Buddhism, I was doing this practice called Nundro, which is supposedly the initial Vajrayana practice, although it's so not initial. And it's like comprised of like 100,000 prostrations, 100,000 offerings, 100,000 um, confessions, all this stuff, and then you have to keep track of how many you do, and that was sort of the thing that I think pushed me over the and made me leave Tibetan Buddhism. But my ex-director and spiritual mentor in the Tibetan practice said that Nundro in a sort of a a spiritual, mysterious way, he sort of said, well, Nundro did the job for you. You found the right place. and that's essentially what happened. But the reason I'm bringing this up was because a lot of times you're not like, I don't want people to get the wrong impression that like we're just all sitting around like in a sob story kind of circle, like crying and talking about the awful things that happened to us. And because I've been part of those circles in the UU church, for example. I don't mean to say that as a downer, because that's good for a lot of people, but that doesn't work for me. And I know it doesn't work for a lot of people, because, that's not really always what you want. Sometimes you want uplifting and laughing. And so I'm saying this because I come to the Sangha many times, I'm confessing the most ridiculous thing. And I think of it as confession because, sometimes you might like make judgments, like you said. You mentioned your wife. So I'll say, sometimes, and I've used the story in the Sangha before. My wife and I have an ongoing struggle with where the sponge goes in the kitchen sink. It drives me absolutely bonkers, truthfully, and hopefully she won't see this, but she puts it on. We have a double porcelain sink. She'll put the sponge on the thing in the middle, where and I think a lot of people do that. For some reason, I think that's a really stupid place to put the sponge. So every time I see it there, I put it in the dish drainer. and every time she sees it there, she puts it up on that thing. So, sometimes I can, depending on the day, sometimes that can make me crazy, like, geez, what a stupid place to put the sponge. But I'll confess that. So it can be that stupid. I know I'm stupid, but sometimes, I'm not going to always say that to my wife, because I'm not that big of a person. I'm not always going to say, oh, gee, I'm wrong. I shouldn't say that. I don't, but I will confess it to the Sangha, and I feel better afterwards. So I just wanted to lighten the load there. No confession, right, Terry?
Oh, I mean, one of the, in my view, few things that the Catholic Church got right is that confession is good for the soul.
Exactly. Well, in Tibetan Buddhism, you confess too, and I get that. And then I had
Yep.
a Tibetan Buddhist teacher that said, if you want to keep something that you're doing or thinking quiet, don't shut the door, because it's all out there. It's all out there. Everything is out there, and I think that's what Sangha does. Is it allows you to just feel real comfortable about being your knuckleheady self. In
Yeah.
Shin Buddhism, we call it Bonbu, which just means foolish being, because we all are. And you alluded to that, Bradley. So it's nice to know that. And I think everyone in our Sangha that goes regularly, and even people who have come and gone, feel very comfortable being foolish beings around each other. So far, I think we should probably close off. It's been about an hour, and I think it was a wonderful discussion. I hope it gives you a flavor of what's going on. Do you guys have anything to add before I summarize and close up?
I have one more thing just on the topic we were just on about
Sure.
Dharma glimpses by the members of the Sangha. I just wanted to add that I'm really happy that we added that. And I think a lot of people too, with religion and Buddhism too, there's this very people think of a hierarchy. It's just like, well, how could I have anything to share if I'm just starting as a new member? And well, I don't know anything, and so therefore I should write anything to share for the group. And we want to hear from everybody, because I don't think you don't need to be a member of the Everyday Sangha for 3 months or 6 months, and then now you're allowed to share, because you're allowed to see the Dharma in everyday life and apply the teachings of the Dharma. No, it's right away. So that's something I wanted to just share and highlight, because I love that that's part of our new format, and just to really encourage people to not just show up, but if you show up and you want to kind of share what you're learning, we love that. So that's what I wanted to add.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I'm always like blown away at the people who share what they share. It's like you read all these books by important Buddhist teachers, and the time and our Sangha share it could be written up like that. I mean, it's like their glimpses into the Dharma in their lives are sometimes spectacular to me. It's amazing, I think.
And I did
don't set the bar too high, though, or you'll intimidate people who not want to join.
Good point.
Well, that's what I was just gonna add to that. Not that, in some of the glimpses, they don't have to be mind-blowing, and they could be mind-blowing to you and maybe not to me. It might be very ordinary, and not that there's anything wrong with that. So there's that too, right, with our history of presenting in schools, probably maybe in work, if we want to put do a great job and put on a great show. But I think just showing up as oneself and sharing one's experience, that in and of itself is that is everyday Buddhism right there.
Yep.
It is, and you're right, and I didn't mean that in an intimidating way. It's like
no, you didn't.
But it's like I see that this is what I've noticed. It's so funny because when we have the open discussion part, one person will like really get something out of the Dharma glimpse, and then another person will get really something out of the Dharma talk. It's person, place, and time. It's what strikes them. So what I might think could be absolutely mind-blowing and amazing from somebody's perspective, it didn't touch someone else at all.
Right.
And that's why it's wonderful to have all these different personalities, perspectives, outlooks, histories, and different age groups see things different ways. Like we have some I mean, I'm 70, Terry's 60, but we have very young people as a part of the Sangha talking about their struggle with graduate school and stuff. It just gives you a whole new outlook on things, and makes you understand, helps make you understand other people better.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you guys, thank you for showing up. Thank you for talking with me. The next thing I want to talk about is we are planning, if these guys go along with it, and I think they will, more panel discussions for the public to see like this, but it might be more focused. That's the plan. So if you have a question about everyday Buddhism, about Buddhism in general, about a subject that drives you crazy, about a subject that scares you, about a subject that's dear to your heart, feel free to ask us, and we'll have a panel discussion about that. And at some point we might do live ones, but that's down the road. Right now we're going to do recorded ones and post them. So feel free to suggest or ask questions. You can write in to using the contact form on the Everyday Buddhism website, www.everyday-buddhism.com/contact, or just go look around. That's a nice thing too. And then hitting the contact tab, and then let us know, and then we'll monitor that, and we'll say, oh boy, we have a lot of people wanting to know about attachment, so let's talk about attachment. So I hope that sounds good to you. I think it sounds good to Terry and Bradley, and that's it for this chat with Everyday Buddhism. Thanks for listening.